So welcome to another edition of the ROKER Report podcast, where Sunderland have gone back to their old ways, suffering their first defeat of the season to who else but Portsmouth. I'm your host for this week, Jonny Goldsmith. Joining me to dissect this weekend's game is the man behind the ratings, Jimmy Lawson.
Still
behind the ratings, yes.
Yeah. Much to many people's chagrin, it's no one's permanently stolen the gig away from me yet. People can visit the site now and see what I had to say about Portsmouth and Sunderland.
Yes, I'm sure a lot of people will be listening to this thinking, oh, it's him. Oh, here we go. That guy. Right. And Richard Spate is also here. Hi, Richard.
You're right, Jonny. You're right, Jimmy. How are you doing this morning?
Good.
Yeah, well, disappointed, really. Waste of 10 quid for that game yesterday.
Definitely.
Yes, but, well, the first thing we'll talk about is, at the start of the game, we had the positive that Jordan Willis was announced back in the starting lineup after suffering an injury last week. So how relieved were you both to see him in the starting 11?
I mean, I was relieved. Just the fact that he's not out long term. But I think, like was said on the ratings pod, it was a bit of a surprise to see him straight back in there, especially when we got Conor McLaughlin, who'd done a half decent job, both at right back and right centre back. And when a lad's been out with quite a heavy knock, where he was about on crutches and that, you don't expect him to be thrown straight back in. And I think Portsmouth noticed that, and there was a lot of pressure on that back three to begin with. And Willis, I think, I'm sure we'll go into, but that first goal especially, he looked all over the place. So it was good to see he's not going to be out for the long term, but I'm not sure it was good to see him on the pitch at the beginning of the match.
Yeah, well, Jimmy, what do you think of that? We saw that first goal there, didn't we, where, clearly Kenny Jackett was aiming to target that side, because the first goal comes from Marcus Harness, who, I think he's out of position really, Willis, but, he's miles out of position, then Harness is there just to slot it home, and I guess Kenny Jackett from the beginning targeted that side.
Yeah. He really struggled all game, really, whether it was Portsmouth pressing him into mistakes, whether it was them giving him time on the ball and him looking to hit it long. He just didn't look like his normal self. Whether that was all down to him being rushed back too quickly, it's hard to tell. But yeah, I was similar to Rich. I thought, this is a nice added bonus. Willis is fit. Brilliant. Because like you said, he'd come back so quickly. And our defensive record had been so good, you're kind of thinking, well, if he's not there, we'll be okay. And maybe that was naivety. And really, maybe that was the mentality of the team as well. The way the whole start to the game, we were all over the shop. The way we were so complacent. We just weren't at it. And I think maybe as fans, as players, as a coaching team, there was just a level of complacency in our play yesterday. And I think, we maybe took our defensive record for granted, and Willis's performance or lack of performance maybe epitomised that.
I think one of the things with Willis, and I think a lot of the time when he was caught out of possession or looked under a lot of pressure, might be down to the fact that he developed along that right flank or the right hand side of the pitch really effective, well understood partnerships with people like Luke O'Nien and Chris Maguire over the course of the beginning of the season, and that was all disrupted. That familiar interplay that we've seen over again, where Willis has been covered by Luke O'Nien at right wing back when he's gone forward. I don't think there was enough of that yesterday, and I think, if you look at that first goal, you look how far up the pitch Lyndon Gooch was, and the vast kind of swathes of space that they were able to run into. It did leave Willis exposed. Obviously, positionally, I just thought he lost his man, to be frank. But there wasn't that cover there, and there was acres of space for them to run into. So I do think an element of it goes to the fact that the team overall just looked very disjointed.
Yeah, it's the lack of intensity, because it's the quick throw-in, Hume slow getting into position, and that then has the knock-on effect where everyone's just 10 yards too far back. And it was really weird to see, because, Portsmouth have, like we said, we've had this fake rivalry with them for 2.5 years, and yet you just didn't see any intensity out of our team that first half hour, and it was just really bizarre watching it. I don't really understand why the team was so unprepared for sort of the intensity and the speed of play that Portsmouth brought. And yeah, I think the Gooch point's a great one. That yeah, he's not a right wing back. He's not someone who naturally thinks to defend. And I'm sure we're going to come on to Luke O'Nien. And I think there's something similar in the way that defenders build good habits, concentration. They always have to be natural pessimists, which is something I know that Lee Dixon and other pundits talk about. And if your first intention is always how close am I to goal, how close am I to scoring, those good habits just don't build up. And maybe we saw that with Gooch for the first goal. The other thing I'd add as well with Willis just quickly is I kind of think as much as the injury ultimately played a part, I thought Rich made a great point about position rotation. I do kind of think that's who he is. I think there was a lot of fears, Gav's talked about this, that our best young players would go. And him and O'Nien were the two that got brought up. I kind of think that maybe his lack of technical ability, his lack of calmness on the ball in those situations are why maybe the bottom half of the Championship teams looked at Willis and thought, actually, maybe this isn't a guy I want to spend that money on, and maybe that's just his limitations as a player as well. So whilst obviously the injury was a factor, I'm not sure it's totally fair to admonish him from blame. I think we saw some of his limitations as a ball player in the game as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why I think that he's at this level and not the next level.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But I've noticed something about Sunderland is whenever we do concede, obviously hasn't been many times this season, we always concede, seems to be in the first 10 minutes. So why is that, would you say?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but to me it just keeps on coming back to a complacency from the good start we'd had. I feel like it was a team that started to believe its own hype a bit. I mean, because it was, I can remember Hume doing it, I can remember Gooch doing it, and O'Nien doing it, all giving away the ball in our own half before the goal. And it just, I don't know why our concentration levels weren't where they should have been. And the best explanation I can come up with is that it was a team that were ahead of Portsmouth in the league with a game in hand that didn't really fully sort of appreciate the magnitude of yesterday's game. I really can't come up with a better reason than that.
Yes.
I think we've got to give credit to Portsmouth as well, though. They really did come out of the traps, really well and put us under pressure, and they exploited all the way through, especially in that first half, they were exploiting the obvious weaknesses in the side. You saw when the strikers were, their positioning was getting themselves lined up against Luke O'Nien at the back post. Often they were either side of O'Nien, giving him a choice, making Bailey Wright make a choice, and just exposing, I think, a little bit of the naivety at the back. And the pressing was really good. So I mean, they're not a shabby side. Portsmouth, they're always going to be there and thereabouts in this league. What was just disappointing from my point of view was we didn't seem to take account of that. And that, to be frank, is down to Parkinson as much as the lads he puts on the pitch. If he throws Willis back in, if he throws, it keeps Luke O'Nien on left centre back, then Kenny Jackett is going to go, right, look, here's your weaknesses. You got Bailey Wright in the middle, who was as consistent, I think, as he could have been in that performance. Who, he put in some great block tackles. There was one early on in the first half where I thought, hey, you've got John Marquis here. But there was a player either side of him who looked shaky, and they took advantage of that really well. So there's always two teams on the park, and it's not always down to absolutely, mistakes that Sunderland are making. They're exploiting them as well in that League One. You're going to get mistakes, and you're going to give the ball away in your own half. But their pressing was really good, and I think that might account for that kind of vulnerability that we've got in the first 10 minutes. Is that is when teams have got the energy to press like that. Obviously, they're not able to do it all the way through the game, and so that is when we're vulnerable. And hopefully, Parkinson will take that on board, and that'll be something that we kind of eliminate in the upcoming couple of games.
I think that's a great point. That's a really important point. The other thing as well, first 10 minutes that just leapt out at me, it was the speed of the passing. Compare them to Crewe and Swindon. It was how quickly they could get to front and back and be direct. And we're not talking sort of long balls over the top. We're talking them firing balls into their two forwards, getting out on the turn. And you could tell, I'm sure we'll come on to later in greater detail, where we found out versus was it a bad day at the office. But I think one thing they were able to exploit that we've not really seen this season is just how quickly they could get out in transition. It was 1 or 2 passes into their forwards who were quick and good and technical and comfortable in half spaces. And you just don't see that much at League One. There's not many teams that have been able to beat our press so easily. I mean, you can tell that the club were proud of how we pressed in recent games because Frankie Francis mentioned it about 10 million times on the commentary. That's clearly been a point of emphasis and something they're proud of. And Portsmouth just dealt with it easily. Part of that, I think, was they got the early goal, which settled everyone down, meant that their midfielders would try a few more risky passes. Maybe they wouldn't try at 1-0 down or at 0-0. And that obviously helped. But yeah, no, they were a level up. They were good today. And I mean, doing a bit of digging, looking at some of their underlying numbers going into the game, as much as their fans are unhappy, as much as there's frustration around the club, there were a couple of 0-0 draws and games they dominated away from being top of the league. So they're a good team. And as disappointing as yesterday was from a Sunderland's perspective, it is important to remember that.
Yeah, and we actually shocked the fans by scoring not too long after Portsmouth scored. Charlie Wyke scoring after 10 minutes. And that ball, actually, I thought it was going to be signalled for the ball being out when he crossed it in. It did look very, very close to being out.
So I didn't think it had gone out. I thought it was one of those. I think Wilf Zaha did one for Crystal Palace yesterday as well, where he kind of, the ball has to cross the whole line, and I don't think it had. And to be fair to Hume, he made that goal. It was basically all his work, and Charlie Wyke, to be fair, it was a lovely finish. He let it go across his body and hit it pretty well. Obviously, it wasn't far out, but he got himself in that position, and that was nice to see. It's actually the kind of goal that we've been talking about, how Will Grigg doesn't get those chances put along the floor, cutbacks from the byline inside the box, where a goal poacher's going to be, and he got himself in the position. He let the ball go across, so it was nice technique from Charlie Wyke, and I think, again, as was said on the ratings pod, at that point I was quite optimistic about the game. I actually thought it wasn't a bad thing that we'd conceded, actually, because I thought in the run up to the game I was thinking, well, what we probably need is a team to have a go at us, to create that space so that we can counter attack and move the ball forward quickly, rather than being kind of knocking the ball in front of their back line and never getting through, like we've had against some of the maybe lesser teams in the division. So yeah, it at that point in the game I was quite optimistic, but we really didn't get going again after that, did we?
Yeah, I think it was a complacency again, back to the way it was before the game started. And Grant Ledbetter, who's been arguably our best player for the last few games, it's just such a shame that of all people to make that terrible pass, which led to John Marquis scoring Pompey's second, had to be Grant Ledbetter of all people. It was a shame, that, really.
Yeah, and it was such an important time in the game to get to watch. Rich sort of said it. You think, we've taken our punch in the face, now let's get back up and go. We know we're in a real game here. Let's get at it. And obviously, Ledbetter's trying to calm things down. He's trying to keep things simple. And it's complacency. It's a lack of concentration. It's okay. This game's been quite intense. I can relax now. I've got the ball, good possession, under no pressure, 30 yards from goal. I'm just going to play the simple pass and reset, and we can build an attack. Let's just kill the energy out of the game and relax. And he makes an awful mistake, and then we're right up against it again. But I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we just weren't properly prepared for the opposition we were up against yesterday, and I think that goal typified it.
If I look at that goal, though, you see he's completely unmarked, the guy on the left. He could have passed to the guy on the wing, and I feel like he'd done the hardest pass he could have done.
Well, that was what I was going to say, Jonny, actually, is he had Luke O'Nien as an option, who was standing on the byline, and chose not to pass it to him, which I thought was a really strange decision on Grant's part. But what it did expose at that point, obviously you're going to get your defensive midfielder or your kind of playmaker midfielder giving the ball away now and again. He didn't look up. I think if you look at the replay, it just obviously he didn't look up, and he played a silly ball. But the shape of the team at that point wasn't there to cope with it. You had basically your central defence on the left hand side of the pitch again, and it were easy to pick their way through once that 3 was then a 2. And again, I just think it highlights the strange kind of disjointedness of the system, and how the square pegs in round holes in the end was causing bigger problems than just kind of nervousness. It was, I think it undermined the whole kind of system that has worked really well over the last few weeks, and Leadbitter didn't look like he knew what the right option to take was at that point, and he's a very experienced footballer. So again, I just thought it was symptomatic of the strange selection of putting or keeping people in positions where emergency positions, or throwing people back in when we don't necessarily need to, and how that affects every position further up the pitch. I'm sure we'll come to talk about that, but I do think it's important to recognise how, having the wrong players in the wrong place on the pitch can impact further afield, and how that has a knock-on effect on everyone's performance. Because I think one of the things that's been consistent from Jimmy's ratings, from the ratings pod yesterday, and from most people's reaction, was how really it was a bad team performance. You can go through each individual, but everyone's performance was 2 or 3 marks below what it has been.
Yeah, I didn't really see any player that I could go, he's trying, or he's the standout player for this team. But to be honest, the second half comes, and honestly, I don't really remember much of the second half. Really, there was nothing of note that I could talk about apart from the penalty. But before we get to that, was there anything that stood out to you at all?
Just those first 5 minutes where we looked like a different side.
Mm-hmm.
They'd obviously given them a bollocking at half time, and they'd come out and they looked like Sunderland a couple of weeks ago. And so that, that period, as I wrote in my notes, like we did more in the first 5 minutes than we had in the second half than we had in the first half overall. But then that just dropped off again, and I'm not quite sure what was the cause of that.
Yeah, no. All I'd really add is just, like you, Jonny, there's not many standout moments. I remember Danny Collins on the commentary, I think it might have been around 60-minute mark, 65-minute mark, saying, it looks like Portsmouth have weathered a storm here, and unfortunately he was absolutely on the money. I mean, we really created very little in the second half. My main sort of takeaway from the period before Luke sending off from kickoff was just how little we created, how little we did. Yeah, we were just really toothless, and that's really going to be the challenge. I still believe in Parkinson's defensive system to a certain degree. I still think that the 3-5-2 sets us up very well to keep a clean sheet in most games. The press didn't work yesterday. For the most part, it has. I think it will work against most teams outside of that sort of top 8, top 10 bracket, maybe even outside of the top 6, top 4 bracket. But it's another game where we've become a very good front-running team under Phil Parkinson. I think we've got quite a big sample size that suggests that now, that since things clicked, when we go 1-0 up, we're generally quite hard to beat. But it's a real problem. Where are the goals coming from? What can we do to react to games? When teams can sit back against us, who's going to create that bit of magic? If it's not Chris Maguire, who is it? Do we have enough different ways of playing to create chances? I think that's the real takeaway for me, is that all the sort of worst fears about Parkinson were kind of exposed in that sort of 30-40 minute period.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and as I say, we do get the penalty where Luke O'Nien takes down the player, and I mean, I've got no complaints. To me, that's a penalty all day long. That's it really, and send off as well. So
yeah, I mean, on that, he's kind of he was already on a yellow because the referee could just give him another yellow and send him off, and it's probably done us a favour there, because I think it's only 1 match ban rather than 3.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and like the penalty, put away pretty easily by John Marquis, and 3-1 victory for them. Sunderland, I've noticed whenever we're not winning a game, we tend to get frustrated, and usually there's a player who's sent off. I think Bristol Rovers, we had a player sent off. I think we had a player sent off against Charlton as well, and then another player sent off in a game where we aren't winning. So Sunderland have this annoying habit of doing that when we aren't winning games, to just get so frustrated that we get a red card.
I tend to agree with Danny Collins, actually. He, on the commentary again, sort of said they're 3 very different red cards in very different circumstances. And I don't think it's part of a wider trend of a problem within the team. I think I think you could say Max Power not being able to stay on the pitch 2 years ago was maybe sort of indicative of a discipline problem. Chris Maguire acting like a madman early in his Sunderland career against Oxford. I generally think that they're three very different situations. You could argue that with the benefit of hindsight, Flanagan's red's a good red because we got a point at Charlton. If he doesn't make that foul, one of their strikers is going through on goal and we could lose that game 1-0. 9-1 yesterday, it was dumb, but I think it was positional naivety. He's a guy who, you watch him play right wing back and he grabs all the time. Like, he's got his trademark foul. I don't know if you've noticed this. He's done it maybe 3 or 4 times where he falls over and the other team are on a counter-attack and he'll pull back their full-back on the referee's blind side. He's a rascal. He loves trying to get away with stuff. And just because he was playing at centre-back and because he was in the box, it was a time where he had to not do that, because if he does that to Marcus Harness on the wing, Marcus Harness giving him an elbow, he's shoulder barging him and he's keeping on going to try and get across him because it's in the box. It's risk versus reward. Harness is like, well, I'm going down here. This is a penalty. What are you doing? It was a naive mistake from a guy who, like Rich said, was playing in a position that's, well, alien to him prior to 2 weeks ago.
Is this the chance now for us to bring in the youth players who we've been talking about for a long time in pre-season? We've made some mistakes, and I feel like Parkinson's very stubborn and will just stick to the same team, but besides obviously 09. But surely this is a chance now to bring in somebody else who's been, knocking on the door of the first team, or trying to knock on that door. I think
Power and Scowen's positions in the team are quite vulnerable, and with Neil and Jack Diamond, you've got players who could potentially fill those roles. If he's going to persist with Chris Maguire playing almost as a number 10, and persist with playing Charlie White as well, then if we're going to bring those two in, then I can only see Power and Scowen's positions being up for grabs, really. Other than, personally, I'd like to see Benji Kimbioka at least on the bench, at least giving us that option to just change the style of play and to give opposition something that they hadn't maybe planned for to deal with and to disrupt the centre-backs. Because, to be frank, although, like I said, Charlie's finish was fantastic yesterday, his all-round play was just as it always is, which is he's working, he's holding the ball up, he's dropping deep, and when he does drop deep and lays the ball off, he can actually look pretty classy at times. But overall, he's not going to stretch a team, and he's not going to give you an option for a through ball where he's hanging on the shoulder of a defender. He's not playing on the half turn. He's playing facing the play. And so I think we need that injection of just something slightly different.
I'm really glad you brought up Power, Rich, because it's a real mystery to me. Like, most of the stuff that we're doing at the moment, I can see some form of logic in it. Like Parkinson said yesterday, he likes Wyke because of his physicality and his pressing. I think that's pretty obvious in the way we play. I don't quite get why he's playing Power in this sort of hybrid inside left midfield role this season. I'm not quite sure what the strength is. Is it that he's mobile and he can close people down and it's defending from the front? I know Max Power talked about on the Sunderland Unfiltered podcast wanting to get forward, wanting to contribute more goals, wanting to showcase his ability there. But that's true of all midfielders. All midfielders want to be number 10s because it's the fun part. Some of them aren't good enough to do that. And he's obviously our captain. He's someone who's embraced that role. He's someone who likes being a leader. He's someone who's willing to dish out. He's generally, obviously the tone wasn't right yesterday, but generally since he's had the armband, he's been pretty good at sort of setting standards of holding people to account in a way that maybe we didn't see at first in League One. So I understand why he's got the armband. I understand his importance, but I don't really get the role. I don't really get what he's meant to be offering in an attacking sense, and why we've gone away from sort of playing two central midfielders to try and shoehorn him into this role, because it feels like this change in system's been made with him in mind, and I just don't fully get it. I wonder if you guys could help me out on that, really.
What do you think, Richard?
In previous matches, he's supported Denver Hume quite well, Max Power, in terms of providing that bit of cover when he has been in that kind of. It's not really an inside left position, is it? I think it's more of an inside left position when Lyndon Gooch has played there, and that's what I mean about these shoving the kind of round pegs into square holes and the effect that has further up the side. Because I'd much rather Lyndon Gooch was sitting in front of their back four trying to create stuff than Max Power. I mean, yesterday there were one or two occasions. Maybe it was just me picking up, a passage of play, but when he had space to drive into in front of their back four and chose to make a simple pass to somebody else who was in the same space he was, rather than running at their defence, maybe playing a little 1-2 and getting through, he's laying it off to Denver Hume and hoping Denver can do something down the left and get a ball into the box, which is fine, and Denver does that really well. But it's about variety of play, and I think when you've got Maguire and Gooch rather than Scowen and Power in those more advanced central midfield roles or inside forward roles, as whatever you want to call them, you've got much more chance that someone's going to crack one in from 25 yards out, and you've got people who are willing to play little 1-2s and clever balls into feet. But again, that again knocks on further up the pitch, which is where really you want a Will Grigg and an Ian Other up there in order to deal with those little balls into feet in the box. So again, it's just the disjointedness across the whole side, and I think Max I think he plays really well in that Leadbitter role. I think actually when we were playing really well earlier in 2020, he was in that Leadbitter kind of deep sitting role, dictating the play, moving the ball from side to side quite effectively and breaking up play when teams were attacking us on the break. But I don't know. I just feel that we might have the right players on the pitch, but not necessarily in the right order.
Mm-hmm. I think I feel maybe they're trying to persist with Max Power in the hope that he becomes like a Lee Cattermole kind of player, which, clearly that's not going to happen. But maybe there's something on the training pitch that he does that we don't see, and maybe that's why he's the captain as well. There could be things that we just don't see about Max Power that's why he is the captain ahead of other players.
I think Rich nailed it with his performance yesterday, because I remember the same thing, sort of. It was in that period where nothing was happening. 2 or 3 times he gets the ball, he's 25, 30 yards out, and he doesn't commit anyone. He doesn't run in to commit a defender and to play a pass, or he doesn't have a shot, or he doesn't play the tricky ball that gets us in behind. And I think it was probably a confidence thing. I think it's probably him not being familiar in the position, but that is Dan Neil's position. That is sort of where he's played for us in pre-season. That is his position. He looks really comfortable in those sort of tight spaces. I mean, where it more so than say even a Lyndon Gooch, it's obviously where if he was ever fit, we'd like to see Elliot Embleton. I think to sort of move back to Johnny's original question, that's where Parkinson has a real problem, because if you look at our bench yesterday, okay, goalkeeper, 2 defenders, that's pretty standard. I'd have preferred to have seen Jack Diamond on the bench with hindsight, given the way the game played out, than Conor McLaughlin, but I can understand why, when McLaughlin's playing well and has played well recently, Parkinson didn't want to take him out of the 18. Dobson, our only other senior central midfielder, obviously going to be on the bench. I think that was a given. But then you look at O'Brien, you look at Grigg, and you look at Danny Graham, and they're all players who want to play inside that 18-yard box. They're all guys who see themselves as central strikers. And if you have those 3 taking up 3 spots on your bench, and okay, Parkinson brought on both Graham and Grigg in the game, you really limit your options. And I think Parkinson's been keeping those 3 on the bench, or whichever one of the 3-4 strikers aren't playing on the bench, because they're senior players, they're guys on a lot of money, they're guys he wants to keep happy. But there might come a point where one of them has to sit in the stands, and we need Dan Neil on the bench, or we need Benji Kimpioka on the bench. And it hasn't cost us up until yesterday, but I think that's something that he has to look at is, am I concentrating too much on squad harmony and shirking big decisions? It's going to be really interesting to see whether there's a reaction from yesterday's game or whether he dismisses it as a one-off, and what sort of the construction of our bench is going forward, because I think those 3 are too similar, and it's not all Parkinson's fault. It's partially the fault of bad squad construction over 2.5 years, but it's something that he's now got to worry about.
Would you say that this result yesterday was coming? Like, obviously, Sunderland, I don't know if I'm being the pessimist Sunderland fan that I am, is like, well, wait till it comes up against Portsmouth, who seems to always have an ability to not lose to us, basically, apart from one game last season. But I don't know. Maybe it's just me who was thinking this is bound to happen at some point. We're going to get found out by some team who, are very good attacking wise.
I didn't. I'll hold my hands up. I didn't. I was a believer. Like it's very rare that under Stuart Donald's ownership and really under the last few years of Ellis Short that I've been able to look at a Sunderland team and go, oh, that seems to be working. That makes sense. So maybe I was naive. Maybe I was deliberately lying to myself. But I kind of looked at the way teams weren't even having shots on target against us in the last 5 games and thought, oh, this is working. This is working. We've cracked it. We've got our code. We've got our magic ticket out of this league. So I was a bit stunned at yesterday. I think there were certain aspects that the good teams will be able to expose from the performance that we touched on. But yeah, for the most part, I was caught off guard by it. I thought we'd been playing well. I didn't really see any signs. The one nitpick was, like we said, the lack of goals, the lack of chances we're creating. But I thought we were onto something good. Didn't see this one coming at all, mate.
Okay, Richard.
I predicted 3-0 before the game, so which is why I don't bet. Because I'm absolutely awful at calling a game before I see the team sheet, especially. I had a confidence. Like I said, I thought we were due a performance where we actually put the ball in the back of the net a few times. I thought that, everything that we've looked at and all of the analysis and all of the stats show how solid our defence had been. And so I couldn't have been more wrong, which probably means to listen to anything I've got to say about what's going to come up on Tuesday either. but yeah, it was a surprise. But then when you were watching the game, it wasn't a surprise that we got beat at all. I thought it was a fair reflection, the scoreline of the game. So again, you got to give Pompey, I know we hate it, but we got to give Pompey a bit of credit, really, for doing us, really. They've come up and they've properly done us.
Just a quick one on Pompey. I always think of them as the Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme. I kind of look at them as like almost our equals. Like, I remember how close those games were sort of in the playoffs, the fact that they beat us on pens. I always think man for man we're about as good as them. So whenever we play them, I always think we're going to get a close game. I mean, they've turned us over twice in a row now, so maybe I'm going to have to revise that. But I always go into the Portsmouth game thinking it's going to be tight. If we get the first goal, we've got a good chance of winning it. Obviously wasn't the case.
Yes. Well, we move on. As Bailey Wright said in his interview, dust ourselves down and move on to the next game. So, Rochdale away next. Personally, I don't think it makes much difference if it's home or away, since there aren't any fans. But they are in a good run. So, what do we think heading into this game? They're near the bottom half of the they're in the bottom 7 or 8 in the table, I think. But still, 2 games where they've won. Should we be concerned about this game?
Well, they've had an up and down season, haven't they, really?
Yeah.
But it's starting to come good for them. And I think any team that can go away to Shrewsbury and come away with a result is doing all right, because it's a difficult place to go. I know you've just said it doesn't really matter with the fans not there, but we found it a hard slog, the games there the last couple of seasons, and they've usually got a competitive side. They had 20 shots against them yesterday and only conceded 1. Yeah. And they obviously they were under the cosh quite a lot. So it's going to be a funny one, really. I mean, when I've looked into them, they've got quite a young defence. They've got a couple of loanees in their defence. A lad Bowler from Arsenal, a lad Roberts from Brighton, who are both like 18, 21. And I think really we should be, putting teams with 2 kids at the back to the sword. But they're no mugs. I think they've got some decent players going forward as well. Drew against Portsmouth, so I mean, you'd hope we'd win, but like I said, never follow what I say in terms of your accas or your bets, because I think I've only ever won 1 bet in my entire life.
Well, what do you think, Jimmy?
I think we should win. I think we should win quite comfortably. They're very similar to Crewe and Swindon, who we recently played, in that they like to play out from the back. They're all about their short pass and their possession game. But realistically, they were one of the favourites for relegation before the season started. They've had an up and down year, and it's really one where we should be targeting 3 points. We've had our difficulties with them in the past, to be fair. Both wins at their place the last 2 years were slightly fortuitous, so hopefully our team will have evolved. And like Rich said, young team, probably one of the more skint teams in the league, smaller teams in the league. It's a really good chance for us to bounce back. We've just got to hope our mentality's right and that we really get at them from the first whistle.
So one of the changes that will have to be made in the team is Luke O'Nien. So what do we think of who's going to take his place?
Well, it's got to be Flanagan, really, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah,
and that I think should bring back some of the balance. Yeah, it's not to single out Luke, who was doing a job he's been asked to do, but it should bring some balance back to the side, and hopefully we regain that kind of the defensive solidity and that base to build from, which will obviously hopefully translate into dominating the game again. Because that's what we have done against these middling lower sides, is really dominate possession, really dominate, not giving them a sniff, which can be quite demoralising. I think we just need to do that. We need to stamp our authority on it.
Yeah, I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm going to say this is just a little blip in the road, and we'll get back to winning ways on Tuesday. 2 consecutive away games coming up against Rochdale and then Gillingham, but we'll worry about Gillingham at a later date. Any dare we do any score predictions here? I mean, I would say 1 or 2-0 probably is what you expect.
I'll go same 2-0.
Okay.
I'm gonna go 2-1 because I think they have got some decent quality going forward, and I think I think we can't expect to keep clean sheets every week. Mm-hmm. So 2-1 for me.
Okay. Well, that's just about it for the games. But we'll move on to Jim Rodwell making some comments about the current ownership situation. And it's the same phrase that we've heard numerous times. We're in a period of exclusivity. So what do we make of this? Obviously, as I say, it's a phrase that's been used for quite extensively for the last few weeks, but do we see anything true to that? Anything going to happen soon?
There's clearly still a deal on the table, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
I think not to give Donald too much slack, but it's been a very difficult period in which to sell a football club that isn't just about to go out of business. Obviously, Charlton and Wigan have changed hands for not very much money at the points that they're very close to going into administration, which is a very different situation from what we're in, and the asking price that Stuart Donald seems to put on the club of well over 30 million quid is a different scale altogether from the few million quid it cost to take over Wigan. So, I mean, if you're going to get serious investors to come in, they want to know what the business model is going to be and the business environment's going to be. And I think until there's an EFL bailout of one sort or another, then it's going to be difficult to unlock that deal and get it over the line. It seems to be the noises coming out in the background is that that deal is really important. That bailout deal is really important. We saw Rodwell go on Sky News to give his tacit support to the kind of the Project Big Picture stuff. Obviously, he's rolled back a little bit on that, and if you look at the full interview, he wasn't giving it his wholehearted support. But one thing he's felt a challenge in both the Sky interview and the Unfiltered podcast interview is the power grab by the top six in the Premier League. And while our club isn't actively challenging that, fans are going to be very, very sceptical of them, because I think fan groups across the leagues, that is the thing that we cannot tolerate, is 6 teams dictating the future of English football for the next however many decades, and their owners and their billionaire owners being the ones who shape the game. And if our owners are willing to sacrifice the status of our club, which is essentially what they're doing, they're saying that Tottenham Hotspur are a class above what Sunderland are, which I don't think many Sunderland fans would necessarily accept. So yeah, it's a difficult one in terms of the ownership. I don't know what you think about it, but from my understanding, there's something there, but it's not possible to unlock it right now.
I think when I've looked at that, and I feel like sometimes Stuart Donald will say something, and there's been many things said that's never happened. So I'm always sceptical about when he's talking about a takeover, because I think sometimes owners of clubs do that to keep the fans quiet as well. And I did notice Jim Rodwell in this podcast. He did say that the party were in exclusivity with showing us proof of funds, and they're the only people to actually do so. I wondered if that was a dig at a certain someone who claims to be close to taking over Sunderland.
It might be.
But to play devil's advocate, what if he is part of that? I mean, I don't think he is, but there's not been anything from the club outright to say this guy's got nothing to do with Sunderland's new takeover.
There's one crucial piece of information that I do keep repeating to people, that if the club are going to sell to somebody, they're going to have to make sure that this deal can get across the line at the EFL and the owner and directors test. And we've seen latterly and very belatedly that the EFL have actually started to be a bit more picky in terms of how and who they let through that test. Somebody who was described in court as an unreliable witness who was more interested in promoting themselves and talking in the third person than telling the truth by a judge with a business track record that doesn't exist. He's not going to get through. So, I mean, it's nice speculation, but I'm as likely to go and buy his team, West Ham, as he is to buy Sunderland. I can go and buy myself a retro shirt. I can't get on a train because I'm in Wales and I'm locked down. But I could have got on a train and down to London, went and stood outside the London Stadium with a can of my own brand of pop and said I'm buying the club, and I'd have as much credibility as he does. Actually, I might have more, because probably if you look back at my tax records, my company might have actually made some money at some point over the last couple of years. So, but not enough to buy a football club of the scale of Sunderland Football Club. So I just think, it's been said loads of times, he's playing us. And really, this is as much as I want to say about him. So, Jimmy, I'm sorry I jumped in on that.
That's absolutely fine.
All good. All good. I liked it. I enjoyed that.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds promising. It sounds promising for once. Jim Rodwell, he said the right things. It sounds promising. I think Jonny sort of intimated we'd been here before, kind of, with Mark Campbell. It's a good start. It's a good start. Him going on the record and saying that's a good start, but that's probably all it is at this point. Fingers crossed that we can move on and end up with good owners. I think the only other thing I'd mention is it can always get worse. I mean, Wigan Athletic, Barry, it can always get worse. So let's be sceptical. Let's more so than we were last time, and fingers crossed it goes through.
Yeah, I mean, he said this about the ownership, and they're talking to somebody, and if that's what he's saying, then I guess we just have to trust what he's saying and hope that that comes to fruition in the next few months. But it could become someone completely out of nowhere, or maybe it's still these American Dell owners. I doubt it, but maybe there's something there. But yeah, we'll find out soon, I hope. I guess that's best I can do. But also we've got something about the women's team as well, Richard.
Yeah, it's just come out this morning. It's recording on Sunday morning ahead of the away game at West Brom this afternoon. And yeah, after we've been talking about it, and a lot of fans have been on social media about the fact that we haven't seen anything of the women's team in terms of video, and certainly not fans being let into the ground over the last few days. I spoke to Chris Waters earlier in the week about this, as in my role with Red and White Army as ROKER Rapport's co-opted rep, and they've gone ahead and they're going to be putting video highlights out today, which is really good. They've started to do pre-match interviews with Mel Ray and the players as well, again, which is really, really welcome to see. I mean, we've been trying to up our coverage from ROKER Report's end, but we want the club to demonstrate their commitment to the lasses, and so the video highlights is a good first step. We've also asked about letting fans in, because Newcastle and Middlesbrough are able to do it and we're not, and there are young kids being taken along to see Middlesbrough and Newcastle rather than Sunderland, and we don't want them getting used to supporting teams playing in black and white. And that's a really big thing. Even if it's just 100 young boys and girls from Sunderland who are going and watching that's 100 families further down the line who are going to have, mixed loyalties maybe. We don't want that. So there's still a bit of work for them to do, and I'm still waiting. I mean, Chris only works a couple of days a week. We'll find out next week about letting fans in and some of the other bits and pieces, but it's really good to see that they're taking the lasses seriously eventually, and that's good. And there has been a little bit of an improvement in the relationship between the fan groups and the club, the people running the club rather than the owners. So which is also positive to see, because we don't want to be at each other's throats. You don't want it to be an acrimonious relationship. You want everyone pulling in the same direction, and hopefully with new ownership, we'll take that to the next level.
Absolutely. Well, that's just about it for today's edition of the ROKER Report podcast. We have, as I say, 2 games from now until next week when we'll be recording another one. So hopefully the 6 points picked up by then, or maybe hopefully 4 at least. Six is what we're aiming for, yes, 6. Absolutely. But yes, thank you, Richard, for joining me today.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, no worries, Jonny.
No worries. And thanks, Jimmy, as well.
Cheers, Jonny. Good to be on.
Yeah, as usual, thanks everyone for tuning in and listening to the ROKER Report podcast. We'll see you again soon.